So, to start this off, I want you to picture it's 1986. An ordinary person goes to like a surplus equipment sale and buys a used, completely unremarkable IBM copier.
Just a standard office machine.
Right, just a piece of junk, basically. And when they get it home, they open it up to, check the mechanics or fix a jam. But they don't find a crumpled up memo or a standard repair manual inside the chassis.
No, they find something entirely different.
Yeah. What they supposedly pull out is this heavily classified 40-page technical document. And it doesn't tell you how to fix a toner cartridge.
Far from it.
It details with this really chilling mathematical precision how to weaponize the global economy, like how to turn inflation, the media, and even the price of groceries into invisible weapons against the civilian population.
It is honestly one of the most striking origin stories for a document I think we've ever encountered on a deep dive.
It really is.
The premise it establishes is just profound.
Yeah.
And deeply unsettling. It's this idea that the chaotic struggles of our daily lives, the sudden spike in gas prices, the cultural obsessions we literally can't escape, the distant wars, they aren't random accidents of history.
Right, they aren't just bad luck.
Exactly. They are the calculated outputs of a system being managed by people who view humanity not as individuals, but as predictable, manageable data points on a giant circuit board.
And that is exactly the core mission of today's deep dive. We are examining an incredibly dense, controversial, and wildly influential stack of source material.
It's massive.
It is. We are unpacking the foundational conspiracy text of the late 20th century, which is Behold a Pale Horse, written by Milton William Cooper. And I mean, looking at the sheer volume of material we have in front of us today, it is an absolute labyrinth.
Oh, yeah. It's all over the place.
We have personal military memoirs, we have alleged top-secret intelligence briefings, and we have these sweeping, unified theories of historical control.
It really is a unified theory of everything. But because of the sheer density and, honestly, the explosive nature of what Cooper claims, we need to establish our parameters right at the outset.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we have to lay down the rules of engagement for this specific deep dive.
It's crucial.
The text we are analyzing today is politically charged in the extreme. I mean, it points fingers at left-wing administrations, right-wing administrations, global banking cartels, and major religious institutions like the Vatican.
Nobody is spared.
Nobody. So to be incredibly clear to you, the listener, we are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing Cooper's worldview as objective reality, nor are we bringing in outside fact checkers to, debunk him line by line.
Right, that's not what we're doing.
Our mission is purely analytical. We are mapping the architecture of this text so you can understand the underlying mechanics of a narrative that has absolutely shaped modern conspiratorial thinking for decades.
To really understand the modern landscape of alternative narratives, you have to understand the framework that Cooper built. But, you can't just dive into his theories about global engineering without understanding the lens through which he viewed the world.
Exactly.
The entire authority of this text rests completely on his personal biography.
Yeah, he doesn't position himself as some armchair philosopher connecting dots in a dusty library. He positions himself as a literal whistleblower.
Someone who was inside the room.
Exactly, someone who was deeply embedded inside the military-industrial complex, who saw the hidden gears turning, and who barely made it out to tell the tale. And the foundation of that worldview actually starts with his father.
Right.
Cooper was born in 1943 into an entrenched, multi-generational military family. His father, Jack, was a strict United States Air Force command pilot.
And that environment is just so critical to everything that follows. Cooper basically grew up steeped in a culture of absolute hierarchy, strict discipline, and the omnipresent reality of the Cold War.
It was his whole life.
Yeah, the military wasn't just a job for his family. It was their entire reality, their moral center.
But the text describes a specific moment that really shattered his childhood innocence, and it wasn't like a scary story around a campfire.
No, it was real trauma.
He was 9 years old. He's living with his family at Lodges Field in the Azores, and he's sitting in a movie theater, just a completely normal kid activity, right?
Yeah.
When suddenly the film cuts out. The lights come up, and an announcement asks for immediate blood donors.
Right.
So he walks out of the theater, looks down at the military flight line, and sees a massive B-29 bomber that has completely crashed.
Wow.
It is entirely consumed by a wall of fire.
The way he describes that memory is incredibly visceral. He writes about seeing men literally on fire running through the darkness.
I can't even imagine that at 9 years old.
Right. For a kid, that is a profound collision with mortality. He explains that this incident gave him this sudden, terrifying understanding of the stakes of his father's career.
Yeah, the real cost.
Exactly. It instilled in him this deep reverence for military sacrifice. He realized that the whole concept of duty involved immense, horrifying physical risks.
So given that trauma, you might think he'd, run the other way and become an accountant or something. But the military conditioning runs so deep that he actually follows in his father's footsteps.
He goes right in?
Yeah. In 1961, he joins the Air Force, and he doesn't just get assigned to a motor pool in the middle of nowhere. He ends up in the Strategic Air Command.
Which is intense.
Very. He's working on B-52 bombers, KC-135 refueling aircraft, and Minuteman missiles. We are talking about the absolute tip of the nuclear spear here.
He was working in daily proximity to live megaton-yield atomic weapons.
That's wild.
He even describes the routine of having to wear a dosimeter just to measure the radiation he was absorbing on a regular shift.
Just a normal Tuesday at work.
Yeah, exactly. He held a secret security clearance. He was a trusted cog in the elite defense apparatus during really the most volatile years of the Cold War.
Which makes his first major psychological break so fascinating to read about. The text pinpoints November 22, 1963, the Kennedy assassination.
A huge turning point.
Cooper is on duty, alone in the orderly room, watching the live television broadcast. He describes just going completely numb, literally crying at his post. But the grief is immediately overtaken by sheer apocalyptic terror.
Because almost instantly after the assassination is confirmed, his bomber base is thrown into a red alert.
Right.
They are escalated to DEFCON 2.
And for context, for anyone who doesn't know, DEFCON 2 means nuclear war is considered imminent and unavoidable. The base goes into total lockdown.
It's the highest state of readiness short of actual war.
Yeah. Cooper describes spending the next 3 days practically living under the belly of a B-52 bomber. He is just staring up at the bomb bay doors, waiting for them to open, waiting for the klaxon to sound the order to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against the Soviet Union.
Is waiting for the world to end.
He writes that everyone on base thought the world was literally ending that weekend.
Put yourself in his psychological state for a second. He has surrendered his entire life to an institution that is now telling him the apocalypse is likely hours away.
It's a crucible.
A complete crucible.
Yeah.
He survives it, obviously, but it fundamentally alters his perception of geopolitical fragility. After his Air Force stint, he transitions to the Navy and volunteers for one of the most claustrophobic and tense duties imaginable.
It's Marines.
Submarines. He is assigned to the USS Tiru, operating out of Pearl Harbor.
And this is where the narrative takes a really sharp turn from intense military realism into the extraordinary. He describes an event while on watch on the bridge of the submarine.
This is the big one.
Yeah. He's standing there with an ensign and another seaman, scanning the horizon, when a massive object literally emerges from the ocean. He says it was a dull, pewter-colored disc the size of an aircraft carrier.
Just massive.
It rises out of the water, shedding the ocean off its hull, and tumbles lazily up into the cloud cover.
And the detail he provides here is incredibly methodical. He notes that it wasn't, a trick of the light or a fleeting glimpse.
They watched it for a while.
They watched it happen repeatedly. It would plunge back down, opening this enormous unnatural hole in the water, and then ascend again. And crucially, he claims the submarine's radar confirmed the physical contact at a range of 3 nautical miles.
So it wasn't just visual.
Exactly. It was an intelligently controlled craft operating with physics that entirely defied their understanding.
He even says the captain of the submarine came up to the bridge and personally photographed the object. But what happens after they dock back at Pearl Harbor is the true pivot point of the entire book.
That's right. Because the visual of the UFO is spectacular, sure, but the institutional betrayal is what truly radicalizes him.
Yeah, let's get into that.
When they return to port, Cooper is pulled into a secure room for an interrogation by a commander from the Office of Naval Intelligence, the ONI.
Which is serious.
Very. The commander asks him what he saw. Cooper, still believing in the chain of command, answers truthfully. He says he believes he saw a flying saucer.
And the ONI commander absolutely loses his mind. He screams at Cooper, threatens to throw him in the brig for the rest of his life, threatens him with a $10,000 fine, and tells him he'll lose all his military pay.
But Cooper, having grown up around military officers his whole life, recognizes a performance when he sees one.
He knows how they act.
Right. He realizes the officer isn't actually angry. He's using a calibrated psychological tactic. The commander wants him to deny his own reality.
To break him.
Yes. So Cooper recalibrates. He looks at the officer and just says, I didn't see a damn thing.
And the commander immediately smiles, tells him he's a good sailor, and forces him to sign a draconian non-disclosure agreement under the explicit threat of treason.
Chilling.
It really is. If you're listening to this and wondering how someone flips from a loyal soldier to a conspiracy theorist, this is the blueprint right here. The military hierarchy he practically worshipped just threatened his freedom and forced him to legally deny a reality he witnessed with his own eyes.
It shatters the foundational trust. He realizes the institution operates on a shadow ledger of truth. And following that, his journey only gets darker.
Yeah, he ends up in Vietnam.
He serves in Vietnam, commanding a patrol boat in the highly contested waters near the DMZ. He experiences brutal, close-quarters combat. He details the death of a close friend, Bob Barron, whose boat goes missing and whose body is later recovered.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It is. Cooper is a decorated veteran. He earns the Naval Commendation Medal with Combat V. He has seen the meat grinder of foreign policy up close.
Which brings him to his final and definitely most sensitive assignment. Because of his combat record and his clearances, he is reassigned to the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet in Hawaii.
The CNC-BAC, FLT.
Right. He is given a top-secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information clearance. He's placed on the intelligence briefing team. And it's in this vault, surrounded by the highest-level strategic summaries in the Pacific Theater, that he claims he saw the documents that confirmed his darkest suspicions.
He claims he read internal briefings, proving that the Office of Naval Intelligence was not only aware of, but actively involved in, the assassination of JFK.
Which ties right back to his trauma from the Air Force Base.
Exactly. He also claims he saw extensive documentation that the alien presence was real, that the government had known for decades, and most importantly, that this extraterrestrial threat was being secretly managed by an elite cabal to forge a new world order.
It's a staggering escalation. We really have to pause and look at the trajectory here. If you read this as a character study, it's almost like a dark Forrest Gump.
That's a great way to put it.
Cooper claims to have been uniquely positioned at the nexus of nearly every major historical anxiety of the 20th century. The nuclear terror, the Kennedy assassination, the UFO phenomenon, the trauma of Vietnam, and finally the inner sanctum of classified intelligence.
And that is exactly why his text resonates with so many people. He is leveraging the undeniable authenticity of his military trauma to lend authority to his grandest theories.
He's bleeding for it.
Right. He speaks the language of a man who has been used and discarded by the machine.
But I want to scrutinize the logic of that leap for a second. How does a man go from seeing a bizarre craft in the ocean and reading some highly classified intelligence summaries to arriving at the conclusion that literally all of human society, our economic crashes, our pop culture, our education system, is a meticulously engineered trap?
It's a huge jump.
It's one thing to say the government keeps secrets. It's an entirely different universe to claim they mathematically control reality.
To justify that massive leap, Cooper presents the document we mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The copier document.
Yes. He doesn't ask the reader to just take his word for the existence of this global engineering. He produces what he claims is the actual instruction manual.
The document found in the IBM copier in 1986. It's titled Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars.
Yes. The text presents this document, dated May 1979, as a doctrine originally adopted by elite power brokers, specifically the Illuminati and the Bilderberg Group, during a secret meeting in 1954.
Okay.
The document frames itself as an introductory programming manual for a Third World War, but it explicitly redefines what war is.
How so?
This isn't a war fought with standing armies and artillery. It is a quiet war, fought with subjective biological warfare, psychological manipulation, and above all, economic engineering.
And the underlying philosophy of this document is a concept they call operations research. According to the text, operations research was a methodology developed by the British during World War II to solve massive logistical problems.
Like radar deployment.
Right. How do you optimally distribute radar networks? How do you manage supply lines under constant bombing? It was about using complex mathematics to predict and manage vast, chaotic systems.
But the chilling premise of Silent Weapons is that after the war, the global elite looked at operations research and realized its true potential.
They saw a new tool.
Exactly. If you can use mathematics to predict and control the movement of troops and supplies, you can use those exact same mathematical models to predict and control a civilian population. They literally turned the weapon inward.
And the tone of this manual, I really want to emphasize this for you listening. It doesn't read like a political manifesto with, flowery ideological language.
Not at all.
It reads like a detached clinical laboratory report where the rats are human beings. The document explicitly states that a nation of people who refuse to use their intelligence are no better than animals who don't have intelligence.
It's brutal.
Therefore, it argues, by their own consent and apathy, the general public are nothing more than beasts of burden and stakes on the table.
It is the ultimate expression of elite sociopathy. They view human empathy, community, and individual agency as completely irrelevant variables. To them, society is purely an aggregate of predictable data points.
Just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yes. And the way they operationalize this control is by mapping the laws of physics directly onto the economy.
This is where the text gets highly technical, but it's honestly fascinating. The document argues that an economy obeys the exact same mathematical principles as an electrical circuit.
Which is wild to think about.
It claims you can literally build a computer model of society using electronic components as metaphors.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that analogy, because it is the engine of their entire theory. In a basic electrical circuit, you have three passive energy components: capacitance, conductance, and inductance.
Okay, stick with us here, guys.
The manual maps these perfectly to economic concepts. Capacitance, which is the ability to store energy, represents capital, your money, your physical inventory, the actual assets of a nation.
Got it.
Conductance, which is the flow of energy, represents goods, the actual production and movement of materials. And inductance, which is the inertia or magnetic field in a circuit, represents services, which is driven entirely by the population, by human labor.
So if society is literally just an electrical circuit to them, how do they control the voltage? How do they manipulate it without, blowing all the fuses?
That is where the shock testing comes in.
Right. The text introduces a concept called economic shock testing. The analogy it uses is brilliant, structurally speaking. It says, think about how aviation engineers test an airplane's airframe. They don't just put it in the sky and hope it works.
That would be disastrous.
They put it on the ground, they bolt it down, and they fire a heavy projectile at the wing. Then they use vibration transducers to measure the recoil impulse. They watch the shock wave travel through the metal to see where it flutters, where the weak points are.
And the manual explicitly states that economic engineers do the exact same thing to the general public.
So imagine this in your own life. You go to the grocery store, and suddenly, overnight, the price of beef has tripled. Or gas jumps $2 a gallon without warning.
We've all been there.
Right. The text claims this isn't just a supply chain glitch. It is a deliberate, artificial shock fired into the economic airframe. The elite create the shock, and then they use massive computer mainframes to monitor the resulting shock waves across society.
They are watching the data to see how you react. Do you stop buying beef and switch to chicken? Do you cancel your family vacation? Or do you stubbornly maintain your lifestyle by going into credit card debt?
They want to know your breaking point.
Exactly. By running these shock tests repeatedly over decades, they map out the behavioral algorithms of the population. They discover the exact psychoeconomic structure of what they coldly refer to as the dissipative consumer structure, which is their clinical term for a family household.
That is just so bleak. Have you ever looked at your bank account, looked at inflation, and felt like the economy was just a rigged casino? Like you were constantly running on a treadmill and someone else is holding the speed dial?
Most people have.
Silent Weapons claims that feeling of helplessness is a mathematically engineered feature of the system. In fact, it argues that inflation itself is a primary weapon. The document calls it paper inductance.
Let's break down paper inductance. The text defines inflation simply as the act of printing money in excess of the true gross national product. But it goes further than basic economics.
How so?
It argues that the elite use inflation as a psychological tool. By flooding the market with paper currency, they manufacture a false sense of prosperity. The public feels richer because there are more dollars in their hands.
So they spend more.
Right. They buy bigger houses, they take on massive loans, they become entirely complacent.
But the manual notes that this creates a massive unstable imbalance in the economic circuit. You have built up immense kinetic energy, huge demand driven by greed and a growing population. But it's not backed by true physical resources. It's a bubble of paper inductance.
And according to the cold logic of the manual, this excess energy must eventually be balanced. If the system isn't carefully managed, it violently collapses.
And this leads to war.
Yes. But
Okay.
the document describes war in entirely sociopathic terms. War is not fought for ideology or territory. War is merely the act of destroying the creditor.
Wow.
It is the elite deciding to slaughter the surplus population, the very public who traded their labor for inflated currency simply to balance the global ledger and reset the circuit.
So, to keep the public from realizing they're essentially batteries in this rigged circuit, the manual outlines the strategy of diversion. And this is the part of the text that honestly feels the most prescient.
It really does.
It argues that the absolute simplest method for securing this silent weapon is to ensure the public remains undisciplined, ignorant, and fundamentally confused.
The methodology for diversion is comprehensive. The document instructs the elite to barrage the public's attention with constant distractions.
They flood the media. The text literally advocates for saturating the public consciousness with sex, violence, and what it calls junk food for thought.
Just endless noise.
The goal is to keep the adult population completely captivated by matters of no real importance. Sports rivalries, celebrity gossip, manufactured political outrage over totally trivial issues.
Meanwhile, they ensure that the public education system, specifically in areas of rigorous logic, pure mathematics, economics, and true history, is deliberately degraded.
It's intellectual sabotage disguised as entertainment.
Exactly. It even fundamentally recontextualizes the military draft.
Oh, this part was wild.
Right. Within the logic of silent weapons, the draft has nothing to do with defending the borders of a sovereign nation. It describes the draft as an institution of compulsory collective sacrifice.
So it's psychological.
Entirely. The psychological objective is to intimidate the population, to violently strip away a young man's foundational moral or religious training, and to force the parents to submit to the omnipotent authority of the state.
It creates a trauma bond between the citizen and the government, ensuring long-term social conformity.
That's the goal.
I want to pause and synthesize this because the implications are just massive. Cooper is presenting a document that treats the global economy like a giant, intricately wired circuit board, managing inputs of labor and outputs of capital, constantly shocked and monitored for compliance.
It's a huge framework.
But if society is just a circuit board, who exactly is sitting in the control room? Who holds the soldering iron?
That is the necessary transition here. If Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is the technical manual, we need to know who commissioned the engineers. To answer that, Cooper pivots from modern intelligence documents to a sweeping historical analysis of the world's most exclusive and secretive organizations.
He argues that the control we see today didn't just spring up out of nowhere after World War II. It is the culmination of centuries, if not millennia, of meticulous hidden planning.
It's a very long game.
His core thesis here is breathtaking in its scope. He claims that virtually all major secret societies through recorded history are essentially franchises.
Like branches of a bank.
Exactly. They are all localized branches of an original ancient source that he refers to as the Brotherhood of the Snake or the Brotherhood of the Dragon.
And he delves heavily into the symbolism here. He emphasizes that across ancient cultures, the snake and the dragon were not symbols of evil. They were universally recognized symbols of hidden wisdom and forbidden knowledge.
Right.
According to Cooper, the central focus of veneration for all these interconnected mystery schools is Lucifer. Now, we have to clarify his definition here.
This is important, yeah.
He is not talking about the Christian concept of Satan, a horned beast ruling over hell. He is leaning into the literal Latin translation of Lucifer, which means the light bearer or the bringer of the dawn.
Right. He claims these societies worship the concept of ultimate intellect, pure science, and unrestrained technological progress. They view themselves as the illuminated ones, the only truly mature minds capable of understanding the brutal realities of the universe.
Which naturally leads to how they view everyone else.
Consequently, they view the rest of humanity, the uninitiated, as a flock of ignorant sheep that must be managed, corralled, and culled by the shepherds.
To maintain this absolute separation between the shepherds and the sheep, these societies rely heavily on the psychology of initiation. Cooper knows that modern secret societies perfectly mirror the mechanics of primitive tribal initiations.
Like hazing rituals.
Yeah, they utilize extreme exclusivity, the promise of hidden comradeship, and often deeply psychological traumatic rituals to bind their members together in an unbreakable brotherhood.
And crucially, the structure is designed to deceive its own members. As an initiate rises through the varying degrees of the society, they are constantly filtered and tested.
It's a pyramid.
Cooper argues that the vast majority of members in groups like the Freemasons are completely innocent. They think they are just in a fraternal charity organization.
Which they mostly are.
Right, but only the most ruthlessly ambitious, obedient, and morally flexible members ever cross the threshold to learn the true, hidden objectives at the very top of the pyramid. The lower degrees are intentionally kept ignorant to serve as a massive, respectable political shield for the elite.
This extreme compartmentalization of knowledge is the exact mechanism that explains how they survive and maintain power across centuries without being exposed.
It's built-in plausible deniability.
Precisely. Cooper spends considerable time tracing this hidden lineage. He connects the Roshania, the illuminated ones of ancient Afghanistan, to the legendary Knights Templar, who he claims guarded incredibly powerful ancient relics and esoteric knowledge in France.
And then it just keeps linking up.
He links the Templars to the birth of Freemasonry, the Préédition, and ultimately to the pivotal figure of Adam Weishaupt.
Adam Weishaupt is really the linchpin in this historical narrative. He was a professor of canon law in Germany, and according to the historical record, he founded the Order of the Illuminati in Bavaria in 1776.
And that year is not a coincidence to Cooper.
Oh no. Cooper highlights the synchronicity of that date as absolute proof of a grand design. 1776 is the same year the American colonies published the Declaration of Independence. And it is the exact same year Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, which basically became the foundational text of modern global capitalism.
To Cooper, these events are not historical coincidence. They are the coordinated rollout of a global strategy. And what is the ultimate goal of this strategy? The text is unequivocal. A new world order.
The famous phrase.
A singular totalitarian socialist state encompassing the entire globe.
I want to dig into that term, socialist state, because Cooper makes a brilliant, counterintuitive analytical point here that completely upends the traditional left-right political spectrum.
It really breaks the mold.
He insists that the true ruling elite at the top of the pyramid are not ideologically loyal to either communism or capitalism. To them, economic ideologies are just tools in a toolbox.
He applies the concept of Hegelian dialectics to global geopolitics. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was a philosopher who posited that human history progresses through a mechanism of conflict.
Thesis and antithesis.
Right. You have a prevailing idea, the thesis. It naturally generates its opposite, the antithesis. The violent clash between these two forces eventually resolves into a synthesis, a new paradigm that incorporates elements of both.
Let's apply that to the Cold War, which Cooper was actively living through. The text argues that the elite deliberately engineered the conflict. Capitalism is established as the thesis. Communism is funded and established as the antithesis.
And they just let them grind against each other.
The elite meticulously managed the friction between the two, threatening the globe with nuclear annihilation. And what is the intended synthesis of this terrifying conflict? The New World Order.
The ultimate goal.
A global system where the public is so traumatized by the threat of war that they willingly surrender national sovereignty for the promise of global peace.
It is the ultimate manifestation of problem, reaction, solution. You create the crisis, you wait for the public to beg for intervention, and then you offer the draconian solution you intended to implement all along.
He also spends a lot of time on their obsession with numerology and open and plain sight symbolism. He points to the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar bill.
Classic conspiracy iconography.
The all-seeing eye of the illuminated ones hovering over an unfinished pyramid. He notes their deep reverence for specific esoteric numbers like 3, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 39. He breaks down the Great Seal. There are 13 leaves in the olive branch, 13 arrows in the eagle's talon, 13 letters in E pluribus unum, and 13 tears in the pyramid.
To Cooper, this isn't just aesthetic design. It is a structural, magical signature left by the Brotherhood to proudly mark their ownership of the foundational architecture of the United States.
But he doesn't just stop at secular governments. He aggressively recontextualizes one of the most powerful institutions on Earth, the Vatican.
Oh, this part is incredibly controversial.
Very. He alleges that the Catholic Church, which historically spent centuries engaged in a brutal shadow war against secret societies, has been entirely infiltrated and co-opted by the Illuminati.
He points to specific historical shifts to back this up. He cites the fact that in 1983, Pope John Paul II formally lifted the centuries-old, strict Catholic ban on joining Freemasonry.
Which is a big deal.
Cooper views this not as a modernization of church policy, but as a public surrender. He goes even further into highly incendiary territory, claiming that prior to becoming a priest, The young Karol Wojtyła, who became Pope John Paul II, worked as a salesman for IG Farben.
Which was the infamous German chemical conglomerate that manufactured cyanide gas for the Nazi regime.
Exactly. He frames this claim as ultimate proof that at the highest echelons of power, the lines between holy institutions and brutal mechanistic control are completely blurred.
But let's test that logic for a second. Let me play the skeptic. We are talking about Wall Street bankers, the Pope, ancient occultists who worship the light bearer, and theoretical physicists.
That is a crowded room.
How in the world can such vastly different, fiercely ideological factions cooperate for centuries? Human nature dictates they would betray each other for absolute control. How does the center hold?
It is the most critical structural question of the conspiracy. Cooper's answer is that they manage this incredibly volatile coalition through the invention of modern, hyper-compartmentalized institutions.
They updated their methods.
Right. The Brotherhood of the Snake isn't meeting in a torchlit cave anymore. They meet in the boardrooms of multinational think tanks. They have evolved into a sophisticated, bureaucratic apparatus that serves as a hidden board of directors for the planet.
And that perfectly sets up the next major piece of the puzzle, the modern apparatus. Cooper claims that the ancient mystics essentially put on bespoke suits. They created a network of ultra-exclusive political groups to dictate policy to the visible governments of the world.
In the United States, the primary mechanisms he identifies are the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR, and the Trilateral Commission.
Which are real organizations.
Very real. Cooper describes the CFR as the undisputed, hidden ruler of U.S. foreign policy. He argues that the CFR doesn't advise the government, they dictate the parameters of reality to the government.
And he traces the recruitment pipeline for these think tanks directly back to the elite universities.
No.
He specifically calls out the secret societies of the Ivy League Yale's Skull and Bones and Harvard's Scroll and Key, which he calls the Order of the Quest.
He notes the statistical improbability here.
Right. The sheer number of directors of the Central Intelligence Agency, secretaries of state, and even presidents who have been tapped from these specific elite collegiate brotherhoods before moving into the CFR.
But the CFR is just the domestic management branch. Above them, operating on a truly global scale, is the Bilderberg Group.
A big one.
Cooper claims that Bilderberg is the ultimate hidden governing body of the planet. He points out that they have a core steering committee of exactly 39 members, again, highlighting the numerology, who meet annually in extreme secrecy behind heavily armed security.
The level of control he attributes to Bilderberg is absolute. He claims their authority was so total during the Cold War that Bilderberg representatives would literally travel under the polar ice cap to hold secret meetings with Soviet submarine commanders.
Just unbelievable logistics.
Right. They were allegedly scripting the geopolitical tensions, choreographing the nuclear anxiety of the era like a stage play.
But the political think tanks are only half the apparatus. The other half is scientific. And this is where the text introduces the Jason Society, or the Jason Group.
Which sounds like a superhero team, but is much darker.
Cooper describes them as an incredibly secretive collective of the absolute highest theoretical physicists and scientific minds in the United States. He claims they are administered by the MITRE Corporation, which functions as a financial cutout to hide their immense funding from congressional oversight.
He claims these scientists hold security clearances that are fundamentally higher than the President of the United States. The president is considered a temporary 4-year political employee. The Jason Group is the permanent scientific elite.
They get paid like $500 a day just to sit and think.
And what are the smartest minds on Earth secretly working on with unlimited budgets? This is where Cooper introduces a claim that sounds like it was ripped from a pulp science fiction novel, yet he presents it as deadly serious impending fact. Project Galileo.
Yes, Project Galileo is perhaps the most audacious specific claim in the entire book. Cooper asserts that the Jason scientists secretly modified the Galileo spacecraft, which was a real NASA probe sent to study Jupiter.
Okay, wait, hold on. We really need to look at the mechanics of this.
It's wild.
He claims they loaded the interior of the probe with 49.7 pounds of weapons-grade plutonium. 49 pounds of plutonium is going to ignite a gas giant. Did Cooper have any actual astrophysics background to back this up, or is this purely a symbolic, ritualistic assertion disguised as science?
Within the text, Cooper relies on his access to classified briefings, not his own physics background. He argues that the Jason scientists possess suppressed models of planetary physics.
Physics we don't know about.
Right. The alleged plan was that when Galileo's orbit eventually decayed, which Cooper actually predicted would happen in 1999, It would deliberately plunge into the crushing atmospheric pressure of Jupiter.
Okay.
The extreme pressure would detonate the plutonium payload, triggering a massive chain reaction that would ignite Jupiter's vast hydrogen atmosphere, effectively turning the planet into a second sun.
It is an incredibly apocalyptic vision, but why? Why would a secret cabal want to ignite a planet?
Cooper offers two justifications.
Okay, what's the first?
First, on a practical level, he claims that Jason scientists had modeled a rapidly approaching global ice age, and a second star in our solar system was intended to physically warm the Earth and stave off the freezing.
An engineering solution.
Yes. But the second reason is deeply psychological and connects back to the ancient mysteries. Cooper claims that if Jupiter ignited, the elite intended to name the new star Lucifer.
The light bearer.
Exactly. The sudden appearance of a blazing new sun in the sky would create an overwhelming global religious spectacle. It would fulfill obscure ancient prophecies, completely shattering the psychological stability of the world's orthodox religions, making the global population entirely malleable and ready to accept the New World Order.
It's a terrifying synthesis of cutting-edge astrophysics and ancient occult rituals. He is telling the reader that the people in charge are not just corrupt politicians, they are essentially dark wizards operating with nuclear technology.
It dismantles everything.
He is systematically dismantling your faith in the democratic process. He points out that members of Skull and Bones, like George H.W. Bush, swear a blood oath of initiation in a tomb at Yale, an oath that explicitly supersedes any subsequent oath they take, including the oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States.
He is telling you that the visible mechanisms of democracy voting, congressional debates, Supreme Court rulings are just a theatrical performance put on to keep you pacified. The real decisions are made in the Jason Group laboratories and the Bilderberg boardrooms.
It's exactly like finding out that the principal of your high school, the mayor of your town, and the local news anchor all belong to a secret country club where they decide weeks in advance who is going to win the high school football game.
It's all rigged.
The game itself is just a violent distraction for the townspeople in the bleachers. But, again, I have to push back on the mechanics. Let's assume this shadow government exists. The United States is a massive bureaucracy governed by a rigid constitution. How do they physically, legally bypass the rule of law on a daily basis without triggering a massive institutional result?
Cooper anticipates that exact logical barrier. He knows the reader will ask how this is legally possible. His argument is that the elite don't need to mount a violent, overt revolution to overthrow the government. They don't need tanks in the streets.
They just use paper.
They simply use the government's own bureaucratic loopholes, exploiting emergency powers to hollow out the Constitution from the inside.
And this brings us into the final, darkest architecture of the text, the subversion of the Republic in Mount Weather. Cooper's thesis here is that the foundational constitutional balance of power, the meticulous checks and balances designed to prevent tyranny between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, has already been completely dismantled.
He points specifically to the executive branch, arguing it has usurped the power to essentially write its own dictatorial laws, completely bypassing Congress and public scrutiny.
And how do they do that?
The primary mechanism for this silent coup, according to the text, is the use of National Security Decision Directives, or NSDDs. These are highly classified directives signed unilaterally by the president that dictate sweeping domestic and foreign policy without any congressional oversight or debate.
He provides terrifyingly specific examples from the source material. He points to NSDD 84, which imposed unprecedented, massive secrecy agreements and mandatory polygraph tests on millions of federal government workers.
The explicit goal there, Cooper argues, was to create an impenetrable wall of silence, effectively terrifying any potential whistleblowers into submission.
He also highlights NSDD 17, which covertly authorized the CIA to create, fund, and direct the Contra-rebel army in Nicaragua, completely circumventing the will of Congress.
And NSDD 77.
Right, which he claims established vast domestic propaganda ministries disguised as public diplomacy, designed to actively manipulate American public opinion on foreign interventions.
But perhaps the most alarming directive he calls out is NSDD 138. On paper, it was ostensibly an anti-terrorism directive. But Cooper, reading through the lens of a paranoid whistleblower, claims this was a thinly disguised authorization for the government to conduct preemptive strikes and retaliatory extrajudicial raids against American citizens.
Targeting their own people.
He argues it was a legal framework designed specifically to target patriots who might possess the means or the will to resist the implementation of the New World Order.
And Cooper doesn't let Congress off the hook. He doesn't view them as helpless victims of executive overreach. He views them as fully complicit.
Oh, he despises them.
He points to legislative actions like Senate Bill 2834, the Intelligence Authorization Act. He claims this bill was deliberately passed in the dead of night, with minimal debate, effectively transferring the absolute power to initiate war and fund covert operations entirely to the president, legally stripping Congress of its own constitutional ability to stop him.
This entire section perfectly illustrates a political science concept known as the state of exception. The philosopher Giorgio Agamben wrote about this extensively.
Right.
The idea is that a government can completely suspend the rule of law by perpetually declaring a state of crisis. Cooper essentially argues that since the Civil War, the United States has functionally been under a continuous, legally undefined state of national emergency.
Which changes everything.
And it is this perpetual, invisible state of emergency that legally justifies the executive branch ruling by decree.
You can feel the tone of the text shift dramatically in these chapters. It moves from clinical intelligence analysis to visceral, righteous anger. He describes Congress not just as an ineffective, bloated body, but as an active criminal class that has willingly surrendered the republic for their own wealth and proximity to power.
So if the visible government is compromised, where is the actual power physically residing? Cooper points his finger directly at a highly classified subterranean facility in Virginia known as Mount Weather.
A literal underground base.
He describes it not just as a bunker, but as a massive, self-sustaining underground city. He claims it contains complete, functioning parallel structures for 9 distinct federal departments. It is a shadow government in waiting, ready to assume total control of the country at a moment's notice.
But a shadow government still needs an army to enforce its will on the surface. And the mechanism for that enforcement, according to Cooper, is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
To the average person, FEMA is the agency that hands out bottled water and trailers after a hurricane. But Cooper vehemently argues that disaster relief is merely a benign public relations cover. He describes FEMA as the designated, highly militarized enforcement arm for martial law in the United States.
He paints a terrifying picture. He warns that FEMA's massive computer mainframes hold intricately detailed dossiers on millions of American citizens, specifically profiling patriots, gun owners, and constitutionalists.
Lists of names.
He claims that when the elite finally decide to trigger the ultimate economic collapse, FEMA will be activated. He warns the reader that the roundup won't happen in broad daylight.
No, it's insidious.
He says FEMA forces will use the cover of darkness, exploiting a major national holiday. He specifically suggests Thanksgiving, when families are gathered, asleep, and completely vulnerable. They will move in, extract the dissidents on their lists, and transport them to pre-built detention camps.
Imagine the psychological weight of this narrative. You are being told that the government you vote for, the representatives you watch debating bills on TV, are nothing more than a carefully curated storefront window display.
Just a show.
Meanwhile, the actual binding decisions dictating the survival of your family are being made by unelected scientists in an underground bunker in Virginia, enforced by a disaster relief agency waiting patiently to declare martial law. That is the stark, uncompromising, terrifying reality Cooper's attempting to force you to see.
It is a narrative of absolute, total encirclement. Every system you rely on, the banks, the media, the church, the military, is revealed to be a mechanism of your own enslavement.
It's suffocating.
But if you're listening to this and thinking, well, this sounds utterly hopeless, we need to look at Cooper's actual intent. If the trap is already set, if the NSDDs are signed, if FEMA already has the dossiers on the mainframes, what is his ultimate call to action? Is the entire book just an exercise in nihilism? Is he just telling the reader to give up?
Not at all. His intention is the exact opposite of surrender. Cooper's primary goal, by revealing the sheer overwhelming scale of the silent weapons, is to deliver a massive psychological shock to the reader.
To wake them up.
Yes, he wants to violently shake you out of your complacency. He wants to force you to realize that you have been managed and treated as cattle. His call to action is deeply empowering within his framework. He demands that you break the spell of diversion.
He wants you to see the string.
He's urging the reader to recognize the invisible mechanisms of control around them and to prepare themselves intellectually, spiritually, and physically to defend their freedom before the trap snaps shut entirely.
Let's pull back and really look at the incredible scale of the journey we've just taken today. We started with an intimate portrait of a single man, a young boy standing in the heat of the Azores watching a military bomber burn, learning of the terrifying cost of duty.
Such a powerful image.
We followed that young man into the claustrophobic hull of a submarine, where an inexplicable UFO sighting and a commanding officer's threat shattered his faith in the institutions he served. And we watched how that single thread of distrust unspooled into a massive, global, multi-century conspiracy.
We've explored the concept of silent economic warfare, where the price of your groceries is used to map your psychological limits. We've traced the alleged lineage of Luciferian secret societies manipulating historical dialectics to engineer a new world order.
We covered so much ground.
We've analyzed claims of underground parallel governments, executive orders gutting the Constitution, and rogue scientific cabals planning to ignite a gas giant into a second sun. It is a staggering, exhausting synthesis of profound paranoia, historical anomaly, and deep, systemic, institutional distrust.
It is an incredible amount of information to process. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought, a provocation to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
I like this.
Cooper's text argues forcefully that the ultimate silent weapon used against humanity isn't a secret executive order hidden in a vault. It isn't an underground bunker in Virginia, and it isn't an alien spacecraft.
The ultimate weapon is diversion.
Exactly. It is the deliberate strategy of keeping you distracted with trivial media, manufactured cultural outrage, junk food for thought, and constantly engineered emotional crises.
It's all about attention.
The goal is to keep your eyes locked on the flashing light so that you never bother to look at the man operating the machinery behind the curtain. It is the total weaponization of your own attention.
Because if you are entirely captivated by the drama of the game, you will never realize that you are just a piece on the board, and you will never see the players moving the pieces.
So even if you completely and utterly reject Cooper's grand theories, even if you think the Illuminati is a myth, that Bilderberg is just a boring corporate retreat, and that the idea of igniting Jupiter is scientific nonsense, ask yourself this question today.
What's the question?
Look at your smartphone. Look at the relentless churn of the 24-hour news cycle. Look at the trivial arguments that consume your energy on social media. How much of your daily attention is truly freely your own, and how much of it is being mathematically steered by forces that profit endlessly from your perpetual distraction?
It's a question of who owns your reality.
We want to thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the dense, dark labyrinth of Milton William Cooper's worldview. Always keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the underlying mechanics of the systems you inhabit, and never assume the X-ray is showing you the whole picture. Until next time.